Good evening. How's everyone?
We are great.
I'm glad. Such enthusiasm. I'm Leslie Kendrick. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here for this wonderful talk and celebration of Ashley Deeks' new book, The Double Black Box. I want to thank Danielle Citron for being our faculty organizer for this event. Thank you so much, Danielle. And to everyone around the building who worked hard to make this event happen, from communications to law IT to building services, to especially Rebecca Claff and our events team. Thanks to all of you. We get to enjoy this wonderful event, so thank you very much. I also want to thank our panelists, who you'll hear more about later, Marty Lederman, Asaf Lubin, and Alan Rosenstein. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a delight to have all of you, so welcome. And of course, I have to say a few words about my dear colleague, Ashley Deeks, and her new book. Ashley is the class of 1948 scholarly research professor of law here at the law school, as well as our new vice dean, a role that I am extremely lucky she was willing to take on. Ashley is an honors graduate of both Williams College and the University of Chicago Law School, where she served as an editor of the University of Chicago Law Review and graduated Order of the Coif. Immediately after law school, she clerked for the Honorable Edward Becker on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. There are lawyers who are remarkable scholars and teachers. There are lawyers who are savvy practitioners, and there are lawyers who are incredible public servants. Ashley Deeks is the rare lawyer who manages to be all three of those things. She served for a total of 10 years in the State Department's Office of the Legal Advisor, including a stint at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In 2017 to 2018, she presented a series of lectures at the CIA, and from 2021 to 22, she served as Special Assistant to the President, Associate White House Counsel, and Deputy Legal Advisor to the National Security Council. She served as an International Affairs Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations and as a visiting fellow in residence at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ashley is also a prolific scholar. In addition to the book we celebrate today, she's the co-author of the 7th edition of the casebook Foreign Relations Law and the author of countless articles and book chapters. Here at the law school, Ashley has been a treasured colleague, mentor, and teacher since first joining our faculty in 2012. She teaches popular courses in national security, in international law, in intelligence, and the laws of war. And I'm thrilled to celebrate her new book, The Double Black Box, National Security, Artificial Intelligence, and the Struggle for Democratic Accountability, which was published in April by Oxford University Press. Danielle is helpfully giving us a visual.
The chairs up for the 25 students before camp.
There you go. In the book, Ashley identifies key challenges in overseeing government uses of artificial intelligence for military or intelligence purposes. She explains problems that follow from government secrecy and the opacity of AI systems, and importantly proposes steps that policymakers, military and intelligence officials, and lawyers in democracies can use to reap the advantages of advanced technologies without surrendering their public law values. I'm delighted to celebrate both Ashley's new book and her many contributions to the life of the law school, to the legal academy, and to protecting Americans at home and abroad. There's so much more that I could say about Ashley and her book, but I know that you want to hear from her and our panelists. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Ashley Deeks.
Thank you all so much for joining today. Thanks to Dean Kendrick for that very kind, overly kind introduction, and to Professors Citron and Rowe and the Law Tech Center for helping organize this. I'm also very grateful, without having heard what they say, maybe I'll retract this later, for the commentators, all of whom are very old friends of mine. I know it is not easy to get to Charlottesville, and it's not easy to do so during the semester, so I'm really grateful that they took the time to come down here to share thoughts about my book. So I'm excited to talk about the book, which focuses on a legal and policy problem that is getting closer to hand every day, and it's a problem that I call the double black box. The problem manifests itself at the intersection of national security, AI, and the struggle we face to try to hold government institutions accountable when they act in secret. In particular, I'm referring to the ever-growing role of artificial intelligence tools in U.S. national security operations. So, as you all know, we have seen an exponential growth in the press, in the news, in Congress, about public uses of AI by the government, by corporations, by individuals, all of us. I'm focused on something slightly different in my book, and that is the uses that are taking place behind the veil of classification. Our national security agencies operate in what I'll describe as a national security black box, and these agencies are increasingly going to use tools that are fairly described, I think, as an AI black box. And so what I want to do is explain why each black box alone, and then especially when they come together, challenge our ability to ensure that our government is only doing things that comport with our public law values. And then I'll end by offering just a few thoughts about how different types of actors can try to ensure that our government is only deploying AI that is lawful, that is effective, and is accountable, even when it's doing so within the double black box. So here's what I mean by the national security black box. This is black box the first. In the United States and in many other countries as well, the governments make national security decisions in secret. This is true, obviously, for operations that are developed inside the Defense Department or inside the intelligence community, but it is also true for departments like the Department of Justice, Department of State, Treasury, and so on. The U.S. government has to use sensitive intelligence to guide its decisions, including operational decisions. Many of its activities use sensitive technologies that we wouldn't want our adversaries to know about. We need to keep our intelligence and our technologies and our operations secret from adversaries in order to make sure that those operations are effective. But that also means that the government has to keep secret these tools from its own public, from us. This, of course, makes it harder to oversee the executive. So I think we can say that our national security institutions, our agencies, operate within a national security black box. So why is that a concern? Why do we care? When we bemoan government secrecy, what we're usually worried about, I think, is whether our government is actually complying with public law values. And by that I mean, are government officials adopting policies, and are they undertaking operations that are lawful, that are done in a way that is efficient and effective, that are done in a manner that lets us hold our decision makers accountable for less than ideal choices, and are they done in a way that requires them to justify the choices that they've made? And the nature of the national security black box makes that hard. Let's start with Congress. Congress and our courts, right? They are the most obvious surrogates for us, the public, in asking these kinds of questions. Congress's Intelligence Committee, its Armed Services Committee, Homeland Security Committee, they do provide some oversight. But members can only know what the executive branch tells them. They don't have their own intelligence agents out in the world. They and their staffers often have less expertise than the expertise that's found in the executive agencies. They have limited staffing to oversee a vast executive operation. So there are a number of structural challenges that Congress faces. Our courts, I think, are able to provide even less oversight. They have to wait for cases to come to them. When the cases do come to them, they tend to accord the executive branch significant deference in the national security space. There are other less appreciated actors who I think can help check our national security executive, though. We're not just left with courts and Congress. I'll just give you a few examples of what I think of as some non-traditional checks on the executive. None of them is perfect, none of them is comprehensive, but each of them in some ways can see some pieces of what's going on behind the veil of classification. So take, for example, foreign allies of the United States. They actually can impose constraints on the executive branch when the U.S. and that ally are engaged in joint operations. They can impose additional layers of legal constraint because they need to comply with their own laws as well as act consistent with our laws. They may also provide moral or policy constraints. They can resist if the United States official seems to be doing something improper. What about executive branch lawyers? We know, for example, that there's an interagency lawyers group made up of general counsels from all of the various national security agencies that has historically reviewed things like draft findings for covert action documentation before the president signs those documents. I think interagency negotiations and competition among lawyers actually serves as an important check behind this veil of secrecy. States and localities may also be serving as a kind of non-traditional check. They work a lot with the federal government on things like counterterrorism, on election security, on cybersecurity. The states may question the legal basis for certain plans that the federal government proposes to undertake. And I think, as Professor Citron probably knows, states actually can move more quickly than the federal government and are moving more quickly than the federal government in doing things like regulating AI as it's used in facial recognition software. We also have technology companies, which we've seen them serve as surrogates, especially in the cyber setting. You have companies like Microsoft or like Mandiant who are gathering what's basically intelligence. If the federal government were acquiring it, we would say it's intelligence. They're identifying who's engaged in hostile cyber operations or serious hacking. They share this intelligence with the government, and they can actually push back on some of the intelligence that the federal government is sharing with them. They could say, we're not sure that that's actually correct. We also have actors like journalists, whistleblowers, leakers. There's a very interesting ecosystem there as well. So to sum up, there's lots of very significant U.S. national security activity happening every day, but the secret nature of it makes it hard to assess whether the executive is in fact complying with our public law values. There are various checks, but each of them is incomplete at best. And then, this is where the second black box comes in, and then we're going to introduce artificial intelligence into this mix. We have advanced predictive and generative AI tools that are they're producing increasingly accurate predictions, recommendations, documents, things like operational orders for the military. It is very hard for people to know how those algorithms are making those recommendations, predictions, documents, and so on. They are notoriously known as black boxes. And unlike traditional military tools, think long-range missiles, which generally do as programmed, these systems can be built to learn on their own, right? So they are going to grow and change as they are deployed. At least they could be set that way. Militaries, including our military and intelligence agencies, I think including our intelligence community, are now using AI in their operations. The Department of Defense needs to make predictions. It needs to detect anomalies, including during armed conflict. It needs to predict who's dangerous, right? Should we detain that person? Should we target him? Where and when should we go out on patrol today? What's going to be most efficacious? What is the enemy's likely avenue of approach on us? You also have things like counterintelligence operations, right? The CIA, you can imagine using AI tools to determine, based on patterns of life and anomalous activity, who suspected spies are, and then go work with the Justice Department to basically try to get those people arrested. Those will often be foreign nationals, but not always. They may, in fact, be U.S. nationals as well. How about cyber autonomy? Autonomous cyber tools have been developed to try to hunt out vulnerabilities in a government's own systems, but also in systems of adversaries. I think AI is going to be very attractive in the cyber setting because the U.S. government is going to need to respond at high speeds to incoming operations against our own systems. But you can imagine how confrontation between two different autonomous cyber systems could escalate into a full-blown conflict, even if unintentionally. Finally, we have lethal autonomous weapon systems. These might be known to many of you. This is where a lot of the oxygen gets taken up. We already do, I think, have states that are using loitering munitions that can be launched, told to find a target profile within a wide area, and basically dive bomb it without checking back in with the human who's deployed it. Okay, so this takes me to the double black box. I think in today's national security space, where we're seeing uses of AI, we are ending up with a double black box. So the difficulties that we have today in identifying unlawful executive branch activities will be amplified by the challenge of trying to understand whether the use of a particular AI tool complies with the law. I think the difficulty in obtaining enough information to try to evaluate whether a particular national security policy choice is optimal is going to be compounded by the difficulty in trying to understand the quality of AI recommendations and predictions that are informing those choices. The difficulty in deciding who is responsible for an illegal or an ill-advised policy choice will be amplified by the challenge of determining who is responsible for significant algorithmic errors that might arise. And the ease with which the executive can avoid having to justify its national security decisions due to classification is going to be amplified by the non-transparency and the inexplicability of AI systems. If we are already worried, not everybody's worried, but there are many people who are worried about the government doing things in secret that are hard for us as citizens to know about and to evaluate, what happens when national security decision makers start to use tools that we, and maybe even they, can't interpret or understand very well? If it's already difficult for congressional committees to get access to sensitive military operations, how can those committees understand whether the executive's AI programs, what they are, what they do, how can they be confident that they comply with our laws and values? Will we know what levels of risk or error that the executive decides to tolerate, including for systems that might actually implicate somebody's life and liberty? Will the executive retain power to override machine-generated decisions? And if so, when? How will that happen? Is it even feasible for the executive to do so if states start to fight wars at a hypersonic speed? How can, in general, the public be confident that it should trust the AI systems and the people who are relying on those systems to act responsibly in our name? And yet there will be a lot of pressure. There is a lot of pressure on the government to do more because Russia and China and other countries are pursuing these same tools. You can find high-profile commissions, you can find actors within the executive branch, and you can find members of Congress who are worrying about and giving speeches about the AI, the U.S. government falling behind in the AI race, especially with China, right, and are urging more progress and faster. And indeed, many of the uses of our economic tools of national security, things like sanctions and export controls and outbound investment reviews, are directed at China's efforts to try to take the lead on AI. But even today, when some of the government's machine learning systems have come to light, U.S. citizens have not been that happy with the systems that have been put forward and have pushed back. So we can think, for example, about DHS's extreme vetting initiative. Okay, so how do we address the double black box? All of this, everything I've said, is not to suggest that the U.S. government should not be using AI. It is, I think, though, to counsel that as we do so, we need a healthy set of checks. I think history can provide some guidance here. This is not the first time that we as a society are confronting significant challenges in trying to hold our governments accountable behind the veil to make sure that their activities that are happening in secret are consistent with public law values. Just think sort of Watergate and lots of the scandals in the late 1970s. Indeed, I think we should consider drawing inspiration from a range of existing statutes and processes, things like There are framework statutes out there that regulate covert action, that regulate foreign intelligence surveillance. There are bodies such as the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. The executive at various times has had internal decision-making processes that create an interagency process for thinking about and authorizing acts such as targeted killings or offensive cyber operations. We've seen historically allies have been able to withhold assistance in some settings where they're not comfortable with certain activities. I think all of these can potentially be translated into AI-focused equivalents. So I'm happy to say more about those possible ways forward in Q&A or just in the hallways. Bottom line is, I think there is no one silver bullet here. There is not a switch we can flip to make this problem disappear. I think we will need to look to both our traditional overseers and our non-traditional overseers. I think all of these actors have some access to classified information, programs, and threats, and I think they can help enforce public law values. I think this is relevant, I think, in particular for this room. I think lawyers have a very important role to play, including lawyers who are inside the government. I think it is going to be critical to ensure that there is early legal input into whether to use an AI system at all, given the context, and what kinds of data and parameters and factors that the algorithm should utilize. And I think more generally, the public itself can signal to the world, to the US government, to tech companies about what kinds of AI tools we support and which ones we want our governments to avoid. So I think we have a big job ahead of us, both as lawyers and as citizens, but hopefully this book at least identifies the challenge.
I'm going to introduce everyone. Professor Lederman, your enthusiasm is just matches mine. I love that so much.
Ashley?
I know, true. That same thought, right? I agree. When the book was coming out, Professor Deeks, you know how humble she is. And I said, I can't wait. We're going to have, we've got to have like a celebration and a book panel. And she looked at me and she was like, no, we're not. And I said, what do you mean? You don't like people to make a fuss about you. You're extraordinary. And I love that we have, okay, don't be pissed at me. You told me that I was allowed to say something. Okay, don't be mad. This is my good friend, right? But the book is extraordinary, and I had the great joy of reading a chapter or two for our Law and Tech Colloquium, Kristen Eichenseer and I. So I have seen it develop, and so it's such an important contribution. It has us think deeply about things that we're often unable to see, as you've done in all of your work. Have us think about those public values. And as we bring to this project of the rush to AI. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited our students are going to read the book too. And now we get to have, so I'm just going to briefly introduce, we have the Friends of Ashley are extraordinary people. And they are scholars, they are public thinkers, and also have been inside governments in various ways. So Professor Lederman is a prof at Georgetown Law Center. He's the executive editor of Just Security, and he has served in OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, with various stints. So next to Professor Lederman is, I won't embarrass any of you. I feel like I kind of hopefully saved that for Ashley, and she won't kill me later. Professor Lubin, who is a professor at Indiana University Moore School of Law, and he's been an intelligence analyst and writes in cybersecurity and in privacy, so that's why we're really close pals. And then next to Professor Lubin is, and I'm not saying we're going to end with the best because you're all incredible, so we've got Professor Rosenstein, who's a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Law, and he is the senior editor of Lawfare. And I thought maybe we might have a little throwdown between Just Security and Lawfare, but apparently that's not a thing. That we can cross-post and cross-publish, which is great to know, right? We could all remain friends. And he too is in the Department of Justice in the National Security Division. So it's so fun to have, our triple or quadruple thread in Ashley be joined by people who really deeply understand all these things from these different perspectives. So Professor Lederman, you're going to go first. You can be wherever you want to be. So you can be seated, you could be standing, all good. Your call.
Do you have a preference, Ashley? Okay, I'll stay seated if you guys can hear me and see things, because I want it to be casual. Okay, I am so thrilled and honored to be part of Deeks Fest. You have no idea. Ashley did not impose any rules on me with respect to what I could say about it. She would have had she had the opportunity, but, and I'm here, this is honestly true. I'm saying this in a little bit just because she should hear it and get the credit that she deserves, but I'm saying it more for you students out there. This book, what's thrilling about this book, those of you who are lucky enough to get the free copies, those of you who will have to pay for it, that's fine, you should. It reflects Ashley Deeks through and through, and all of the great virtues of Ashley Deeks, and they are many, and Danielle barely started saying what they are. You guys, it's probably just the water you swim in. You don't know any different than having, Dean Golliboff, Dean Kendrick, Associate Dean Deeks. These are special people who are doing special things for you guys. You're at a great school at a great time, let me just tell you. And Ashley is extraordinary. I got to work with her on 2 occasions in the government, in the Obama administration when she was at the State Department principally, and then again when she was the deputy to the council, to the National Security Advisor, and sort of running the so-called lawyers group, of which I was a part. I was in DOJ both times. So we talked about a lot of very difficult issues all the time, and that did not end when Ashley left the government or when I did. Just to give you a sense of things, this is what I mean when I say the book is Ashley. It's incredibly lucid. It's a good read. It really is. You can't say that about very many law professors' books. It's really a great read. You will like it. You will understand it. You will see that she is careful, precise, quietly brilliant, but with humility, right? She never draws attention to herself. It's a good lesson in how to write and in drawing in an audience. She's not doing this just to get a book published. She's doing it because she thinks she has something to convey that might really be of importance. And here, those are all strong suits that Ashley has. Other people have them. But here's what really stands out about Ashley. You can tell from the book, and this is true in her public service, in her scholarship, I'm sure it's true in her teaching, she really sees the complexity of issues, cares about the things on both sides of any particular issue, is not trying to be tendentious in the slightest or try to move. She's not trying to win a debate. She's trying to really get her readers, her colleagues, her clients, her students to understand the complexities of law and the fraught nature of public service, but also the wonderful opportunities of public service, and to try to get you to see that there are really difficult questions, right, really difficult issues on every side of all of these questions, and she cares about all of them and is very, very responsive, all of which leads to the following. Ashley Deeks is, I'm pretty confident in saying, she's the most trustworthy public servant I've ever met. And when Danielle refers to friends of Ashley Deeks, you could have had a room full of people to attest to this throughout the government, throughout academia. Everyone relies on Ashley because she calls it straight. She's brilliant. She cares about what she's talking about. I don't publish much in this area without running it by Ashley, much to her chagrin. 148 last night. I couldn't help but start drafting a post about the attack in the Caribbean, and it's like, it's 1:48. I got to check with Ashley to see whether I'm on the right page or not. I didn't call her. I actually sent it by email, assuming she was sleeping. Okay, so I'm using up most of my time to actually praise Ashley. So I'm just going to, what?
Bless you, friend, bless you.
How often do you get this opportunity? I really, and she deserves it, but more importantly, you deserve to know what you have here and the opportunity that you have to study with Ashley and learn from her. Okay, so now I'm just going to sort of tick off things that I know my fellow panelists are probably going to hit and that I want to hear from Ashley about. Beginning under the heading of compared to what? Right, like how is AI, particularly in the world of intelligence and national security, is it really that much of a problem? or is it more of a problem than other forms of intelligence, all of which are pretty opaque? Ashley talks a lot about opacity in the book. And if it comes to signals intelligence and human intelligence and the like, even the lawyers like myself and Ashley, we really did, we got a small sliver of that information and had to make do with that in giving our legal advice. The public and even congressional overseers and the other forms of checks and balances, they don't get to see very much in that score either, and that's part of Ashley's book. But even when something comes to light, there's been a problem, something's gone astray, money's been spent unwisely, something's politically controversial, and it becomes a public to-do, the overseers in Congress and the public and the press and elsewhere, they never get to see the granular details of the human intelligence or the signals intelligence. They don't understand all of this. They want to know why the government at large did what it did and how it would justify it. And that justification never takes the form of, here are the sources that we had in Afghanistan and what they were saying about X, Y, Z. That is all opaque to everyone all the time outside the government. So I just wonder whether this double black box problem is different here. Now, what Ashley focuses on are a few things about AI that give her pause that seem to be slightly different within the government vis-a-vis other forms of intelligence in particular, but other tools that the National Security Committee uses. And that is, the people within the government don't really understand how the thing works or why they're getting what they do. When you're doing signals intelligence or human intelligence, you know it might be wrong, it might be ambiguous and the like, but you know what you're getting. You've built up relationships with people, you know how the electronic surveillance works, you understand Urdu, you know how to translate it, you know all these things. Here you get an output. You put in stuff and you get an output and it tells you, I'm grossly oversimplifying, there's a 78% chance that this person is a member of a terrorist organization. You don't know how it came to that, except that you know that it scooped up, it vacuumed up enormous amount of data to make that sort of determination. So you don't know the granular details, but I'm not quite sure why that matters if the outcomes are reliable, right? And so does it matter if you know how the sausage gets made if the sausage is really, really tasty? Or if, on the other hand, if it's really, really horrible, why do the decision makers, the eaters in this case, why do they need to know exactly what went into it? It's not altogether clear to me why. I think, how many of you have seen the Spielberg film Minority Report? A few of you? This really reminds me of that, right? The Precogs is based on a Philip K. Dick novella, science fiction novella. There's these three people who are born and they're able to foresee homicides a week before they happen. So the military takes over Washington, D.C. I said science fiction, right? The military takes over Washington, D.C., and they have this program where they put them in goo and they tell the officials when a murder is going to take place. And they go out and they arrest people before it happens, pre-crime. And they arrest all the people that these three precogs say are going to murder someone. And sure enough, the murder rate goes down to zero, virtually zero. It works. No one knows how it works, but it works. Now, that wouldn't make for a very good novella or movie. And of course, it doesn't work at one point. That creates the tension and the drama in the movie. And in particular, the government tries to suppress the Minority Report. The one of the three precogs has a dissenting view, which was often me, and Ashley would have to deal with my Minority Report within the Lawyers Committee sometimes. And at 1 a.m., and I was usually overruled as I ought to have been, and that's okay. But at least we had the red team and we were vetting it, so it was being tested. If we were really confident that these machines worked and were providing extraordinarily reliable intelligence, much more so than human intelligence and signals intelligence and all of the tools that we had, I don't think the anxieties would be all that great. I think what gives us pause, as in the movie, is the fear that maybe they don't, or we just don't know. You hear a lot about hallucinations being put in appellate briefs and lawyers getting fined for that. That's the tip of the iceberg. Presumably, most of the time, what's being produced by really, really good AI systems is quite reliable. So I wonder how much of this depends on that and actually talks. And so I'm wondering to myself, I hope the government, the one thing the government can do is make sure it's using the best of these products and testing to see after the fact, were they reliable or were they not reliable? And if they are reliable, a lot of the anxiety, and even within the black box, ought to be diminished to a certain degree, at least to a certain degree. Maybe. I don't know. Ashley talks about a CIA having 137 pilot programs just for one function. Like, they're testing 137. They're going to choose the best ones, right? There's going to be competition among the technology companies to get this contract to make sure their product is the most reliable. If it turns out not to be, it won't be used. Okay, but I'm just going to tick these off. Ashley's got responses to these, as you might expect. The things that she thinks, and I was struck by them, and they grabbed me, that are there to worry about anyway that might make AI different. And I'm just going to tick off some, and you can talk about it. Or you guys can pick up if it interests you. One is it's really eager for government. Government officials are very eager to use the bright and shiny new toys. We've seen it happen. It happens all the time. You get a lot of money from your appropriations committee. They pay you a lot of money. You get this. You're going to use it almost without regard to how good it is. You're just so excited about doing the thing that's in front of you. So we have to prevent against that. A false sense of certitude, right? If these machines are, okay, I don't have to worry about doing all the hard work because the machine is going to do it for me. But that'll be belied if the mistakes become manifest, right? You're going to stop being so reliant as well. And this is also true of human intelligence, signals intelligence. The diffusion of responsibility, right? If something does go wrong, the humans can just point to the algorithm and say, it was the algorithm's fault, not my fault. And Ashley writes really well about that and that problem. It makes you more willing to take chances, knowing that it won't redound to your detriment. Now, most of you think in that regard, oh, you're going to get called on the carpet, you're going to be before a Senate committee, you're going to be this, that, or the other thing, your reputation will be ruined. In my experience, and Ashley's, I think, it's less that and just your ability to sleep at night with yourself. You're making very, very difficult decisions on which lives turn, and foreign affairs and very, very sensitive diplomatic things are going on. And if you have the confidence that there's an algorithm behind you, maybe you'll be quicker to act, and there's a virtue in pausing and being worried about being able to sleep at night and not acting until you can at least sleep for a couple hours a night. And so Ashley writes about that as well. And this, I thought, was one of the more interesting things, not merely accountability, but the difficulty of correction. So if something goes wrong with one of these other forms of intelligence and the like, and it is called on the carpet either outside the government or within the Department of Defense, you correct for it. You find out what the problem is, and if you can, you don't do that again. You don't trust that human source. You change your technology, what have you. We don't know how to correct for this, I think. Now I'm way out of my league here. You guys probably know more about this than I do. Other than switching your product, right? If that product screwed up a few times, you go to a different product because you really don't know. You can't say to the product, don't make this mistake in the future. You can give it the further information that it was wrong, and it teaches itself in the metaphorical sense. But the inability to correct, I think, is an important theme of the book. So I've talked most about what I said here. Let me circle back to something about Ashley. That's why this is exciting. She's got a lot of ideas. She doesn't think there's a silver bullet. She understands the world is complex. You need a lot of different things happening in order to deal with these problems. It is a great piece of scholarship, of teaching, of thought, of just creativity, and of investigation, and of asking questions, which is what you all ought to be doing. And I couldn't help but think, boy, it feels like a universe, like a universe far, far away in a galaxy, a long time ago. It's like this has been blown out of the water, all of this, right? We're living in a world, when Ashley started writing this book, the world was such a different place. The executive branch was such a different place. It is now the case that your job in the intelligence community is to give the president the intel he wants or be fired. It is now the job in the intelligence, in political positions, just to be, basically like, just do lip service to what the president wants. When the president engages in action like happened on Tuesday that are unlawful up, down, and sideways in 17 different ways that lawyers would have said no to in 5 minutes in any other administration, including the first Trump administration, the response has been almost silence from Congress, from the press, from the public. I know there's a lot going on, from students. It's extraordinary. He's teaching us that actually executive officials can get away with a whole lot without regard to all of the public law virtues that Ashley talks about. They can just disregard them, or that happens to be what's going on now. Ashley talks a lot about those public law virtues in her book: legality, competence, accountability, justification, red teaming. Those describe Ashley Deeks to a T. She is the consummate public official and teacher. On my way up here today, I was listening in my car to the Beths. How many of you know the New Zealand pop band, the Beths? You ought to. Okay. I know. I mean, it's with my students. I give I can't make everything a reference to Pink Pony Club, folks. I've got to. You got to have some breadth here. And there's this great song called "An Expert in a Dying Field." How does it feel to be an expert in a dying field? Now, it's actually a metaphor for a love affair and a broken love affair. But Ashley is an expert in a dying field. We have to hope that it doesn't die entirely, so that her expertise and her thoughtfulness and her brilliance and trustworthiness can be brought to bear on hard questions like this in the future. I hope that you all have the responsibility to act with her as your model.
I'm coming up here only because I'm the oddball who used slides. Otherwise, I would be sitting down there. But we're back on the Deeks Fest train. Buckle up. But in all honesty, we're here to celebrate a book, but you cannot celebrate a book without celebrating the author of the book. And so we really need to take a moment to celebrate Ashley. And I will approach a lot of that from my first encounter and throughout my career, what role Ashley played. And to begin, I was a student. In 2014, I joined Yale Law School as a master's student, and that's how I discovered Ashley, through an article she wrote and published on SSRN. This is shortly after the Snowden revelations in 2014. Ashley writes an international legal framework for surveillance. Now, you have to understand, everyone was buzzing about FISA this and FISA that, and Section 702 this and Section 702 that. But who was talking about the international law of surveillance? The European Court of Human Rights had not published any of its major decisions. Those would come later in 2017. The UN General Assembly resolution on the right to privacy in the digital age, later than this. UNGGE reports on international law, cyber, none of that. Ashley wrote this. Now, this is September, a month into my time there. That's when I began writing my application for a doctoral dissertation under the supervision of Michael Reisman about the international law of espionage. The article gave me a voice, gave me a platform on which to stand. I like to say that I would not have been able to write my doctoral dissertation application if it wasn't for this article. I would then not be able to finish my doctoral dissertation if it wasn't for every other article Ashley wrote after this one. Now, it is for this reason that in March 2015, I was so excited to learn that Ashley will be one of the faculty commentators in the Salzburg-Cutler's Fellows Program, a program in which international law students, LLMs, and JDs fly to DC to present their papers and get feedback from professors. And I was even luckier to find out that I'm in the small group where Ashley Deeks will be the one offering commentary. Now, I took forever to find a picture from a decade ago, but I succeeded. Now, you would think that the picture I'm about to show you would look something like this. Me and Ashley having a laugh, talking about national security issues of the day. But a decade ago, I would not have the chutzpah or the capacity to approach Ashley in this form. So the picture I can show you today is the one from the stairs of the event. And I know it's a little hard to see, so I zoomed in for you. Now, I'm standing behind her, so I'm going to tell you what the mind voice is saying in that moment. I'm saying, it's Ashley. She's right there. She wrote the international, it's Ashley. And I just tried to be calm. Now, this kind of fanboying has only happened to me 3 times in my life. In 2014, when I met my doctoral supervisor, Michael Reisman, for the first time. 2015, when I met Ashley Deeks. And in 2016, when I met Daniel Radcliffe on stage and I got to play with him. And I like to say that what connected all 3 of these events is that I got to meet a sorcerer in live for the first time. Now, for Ashley Deeks, her charms, of which there are many, one of them was already elucidated, right? It's lucidity, it's illumination, the spell of illumination. But she has another charm, and that's clairvoyance. So on this screen are all these articles she wrote between 2015 and 2020 across 3 major domains, in each of which she trailblazed and we followed. On the top is all of her writing on the international and domestic law of intelligence gathering. In the middle is all of her writing on the role of secrecy within the government and how government manages secrecy. And then on the bottom is, of course, all of her work on the role of AI in national security decision-making. And so for anyone who has read all of these works, and I have read every single one of these works and cited it plenty, this becomes an echo. It rhymes. It is Ashley Deeks because it is the body of work that Ashley Deeks gets to represent. And yet, the way Ashley presented it to you today is different than the way she starts the book actually. Because in the book, the way the book starts is in a meeting in the Situation Room, where a president, a female president, might I add, is being advised by her senior Department of Defense colleagues about the possibility of an attack against an al-Qaeda official. And they begin to throw at her a series of statistics. She says, the department notes 90% certainty that the individual in question is an al-Qaeda most senior operative, and 62% probability that it will take al-Qaeda at least 6 months to replace him, and 87% chance that he'll be alone in the particular house with no civilians around him. And then the president asks, and how do you know all of this? To which the DoD responds, our algorithms made these predictions, and we trust our algorithms. That's how this discussion starts. And really, the reason why the president is being thrown all these figures at her is because the president is beholden to a predictive rule. And that rule, there can be many in the Geneva Conventions. I just chose one rule. Article 57 of the first additional protocols, which requires the commander-in-chief, in this case the president, to verify that the objectives to be attacked are exactly that and to do everything feasible in doing so, and to refrain from deciding to launch any attack which may be expected to cause incidental loss of civilian life, which would be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated, emphasis on anticipated. So by looking at the expected and anticipated consequences, the law introduces a requirement for prediction. It is in this context that it is worth noting that humanity sucks at prediction. And you don't need to go far, just turn to 1903, where the president of Michigan Savings Bank told Henry Ford that the horse is here to stay. There are many, many examples of that. And it is precisely for that reason that when humanity is told to do something it hates, we delegate it to someone else. And it is in that context, that the policymaker, once told about a predictive rule, chooses to delegate the act of prediction to an industry of prediction, in this case, an intelligence agency. And it is that intelligence agency which operates through its layers of secrecy and layers of code, internal guidance and code, that is producing the national security black box of which Ashley speaks about. And of course, intelligence agents, it was mentioned that I worked as an intelligence analyst for 5 years. We hate predicting too. We love the puzzle piecing of the game. But when it comes to the point of putting a number on a paper or a statement on a paper, we hate it just as much as the president would. And so when we would be told that there is this thing called AI, and all you have to do is to delegate prediction authority to it, that will be the first thing we will do. Hence the delegation generating the algorithmic black box. So this is beautiful Ashley Deeks, simple, clean, lucid. I'm standing here to engage with this work. I spend months asking myself, what will I say next? So here's what I will say. I will take you to a period before AI, dare I say, before the modern intelligence agency. Let's go back to 480 BCE. Imagine this, you are the Spartan king, Leonidas. You are the Spartan king Leonidas standing in the temple of Delphi, your armor catching the flickering light of oil lamps. Around you stand your trusted warriors, stoic, silent, waiting. You have come to make a final decision, whether to lead a small band to a narrow mountain road in the north to hold back the advancing Persian army and buy time for the rest of Greece. At the center of the temple sits the Pythia, the oracle, shrouded in sacred vapors. She does not offer reasons or rationales, she offers moans and cries. Her words are then deciphered by priests who have long trained in the sacred art of interpretation. One priest steps forward and he begins to say, "The gods have whispered. They tell of a narrow road where the sea and the mountain clasp hands. There the great tide will break upon bronze, yet a crown will fall into the dust. From that fall, fire will kindle in the hearts of Greece, and people divided will rise as one." Leonidas asks, "How do you know all of this?" The priest replies, "These are the signs we have seen. This is the will of the gods. We do not see the pattern. We only know to trust in the vision." What Leonidas understands and what his warriors understand is that oracles have always dealt in opaque truths. Their predictions are not interrogated, they are received. The mechanism is hidden behind ritual, the logic obscured in incense and chant. Today, it is not a king and an oracle, but a president and a predictive algorithm. The robes have changed, the architecture is different. No more clay dishes, just satellite dishes. But the structure is the same. Decisions made in the face of inscrutable predictions, trusted not because we understand them, but because we must act. And we are told that those who built the system understands it as well, that the signs are reliable, though likely neither did the priest understand their own riddles while hedging their bets, nor do the coders fully comprehend the pathways by which their machines arrive at judgment. Now, all of this is fine and well if we just stay within the national security state and speak about the black box of prediction in that context. But here's what worries me, and this is why I do think this is a category difference. Because everything I just told you can be outside of the national security state and is often outside the national security state. What we are, I'll do this first and I'll come back. We see predictive rules everywhere in law. Here are just three that I chose. One is in antitrust. Under the Clayton Antitrust Act, you must assess the effect of such acquisition may be substantially to lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. Under the National Environmental Policy Act, you must assess through an environmental impact assessment what are the environmental effects of the proposed action. Under the Communications Act, you must assess, you, the FCC, must assess, determine the public convenience, interest, or necessity will be served or not by granting a license. And guess what? These two are transferred to industries of prediction. And just like in the national security context, those industries are often corporate entities. And guess what? Those industries of prediction transfer those to AI time and time again. And what is produced in all of that is a principal-agent problem, where the principal transfers to the agent the thing it hates the most, the power to predict. And the agent then performs unregulated prediction. And what is in between them is asymmetric information, because I do think that the principal cannot understand how that cookie gets crumbled around prediction fully and meaningfully. And I also believe that there are often instance misalignments throughout all of this. And so as a result, if we keep going, this is what it will look like. If we continue to embed AI everywhere and anywhere, if we continue to delegate predictive authority everywhere and anyway, they will end with AI. Now, I told you that Ashley Dix is clairvoyant. So she already knew that I would say all of this. She has already responded to it in her book, in page 245. She says in that page, some may argue that the normative proposals identified in Part 2 are insufficiently robust to meet the tidal wave of AI-driven changes that they foresee. The book goal, she says, was to focus primarily on procedural rather than substantive adjustments that would be achievable in the current domestic and international climate and would remain relevant regardless of how quickly technological change comes. And I agree and think that as a result, the book is defensible and stands on its own 2 feet. But the book depends on an assumption that Professor Dix makes on page 17. Here is her assumption. The book envisions a relatively predictable pace of development of AI based on current trends. It does not assume that any states today are close to achieving artificial general intelligence. AGI, if and when it occurs, she admits, will change the international and domestic political, legal, and cultural landscapes dramatically. I worry that AGI is more close than we think it might be, and it might certainly accelerate us getting there because of these numbers of predictive rules being transferred. And if that is true, then what will happen then at the age of AGI is that we will be the black box. Because the AI black box will figure itself out. It will know to explain to itself what AI is, but it will not understand what we are. We will become the anomaly. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to celebrate Deeks Fest, and I think it should be an annual thing. And it's wonderful to be back in Charlottesville. I spent a year here in 2013 clerking for Judge Wilkinson, and I've always had tremendously happy memories of this place. Ashley, I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks after I got here, I reached out to you, I think through Ben Wittes, and you very kindly took me out to dinner somewhere on the mall and gave me a bunch of advice, just a freshly graduated law student, about applying to DOJ and being a law professor. So I will add myself to the very long list of people who have been helped by Ashley. So Ashley's core insight is both straightforward and compelling. National security governance always happens inside a black box of secrecy, and now we're voluntarily dropping additional black boxes inside it. Right? AI systems whose logic and provenance are often opaque even to their designers. And this layering threatens the public law values that make democratic governance legitimate: legality, competence, accountability, and genuine reason-giving. Ashley's answer is institutional. She calls for earlier and wider front-end legal and policy involvement, documentation and testing throughout the AI lifecycle, and a web of traditional and non-traditional checks from Congress, the courts, inspectors general, allies, companies, and civil society, each pushing on the parts that they can actually see. It's pragmatic, it's sober, it's exactly what this debate needs. What I want to do in my remarks is offer a friendly extension to Ashley's account. Although the book sometimes makes for grim reading, my worry is that it might actually be too optimistic about how much room remains outside the box. What I want to suggest is that AI will not just complicate oversight, it will actively concentrate power in the presidency. It will box out the other branches, not only in national security, and this is my key point, but across domestic regulation, law enforcement, immigration, public health, finance, and beyond. And it will do so not at the speculative horizon of artificial general intelligence, though here I agree with Asaf that we are, I think, quite a bit closer than a lot of people suspect, but in the short to medium term. In other words, with systems that we are already deploying. So start with the issue of tempo. Ashley rightly emphasizes that autonomous cyber capabilities compress decision windows and sideline Congress's role in authorizing or constraining force. If the operational loop shrinks from hours to seconds, oversight that depends on after-the-fact hearings or case-by-case litigation is effectively governance by autopsy. But this temporal acceleration is not confined to the national security box. It is a general feature of AI-augmented governance. It amplifies what Hamilton called in Federalist 70 the executive's advantage of dispatch. When Treasury deploys algorithmic market interventions, when DHS makes split-second border enforcement decisions, when Commerce adjusts to export controls in response to real-time supply chain signals, the same dynamic holds. AI collapses the window between detection and action. The executive creates facts on the ground while Congress is still scheduling hearings and courts are awaiting briefing. Now add to this the problem of AI-enabled perfect enforcement. Our legal order rests on a tacit bargain of under-enforcement. There is more law on the books than the state has capacity, not to mention legitimacy, to enforce strictly. A good example of this is speed limits on highways. Legislators don't really expect you to drive at 55 miles an hour. Legislators write laws knowing they won't be perfectly enforced, and that knowledge shapes what they're willing to criminalize and how they set penalties. But AI threatens to annihilate that gap. Ubiquitous sensing, automated anomaly detection, correlation across databases, all of this can detect and prosecute every violation of every rule. Think tax compliance, export controls, environmental regulation, immigration screening. When Congress passed all the relevant statutes, it assumed human bandwidth would naturally limit enforcement to the most serious cases. But scale up the model-driven social media vetting and automated fraud detection that agencies are already exploring, and you effectively rewrite every law to be maximally punitive without Congress voting on anything. And this empowers the one actor who oversees every federal enforcement bureaucracy, the president. A third vector of executive empowerment is the information environment. Government speech, the doctrine that allows the executive to communicate its own views without First Amendment constraints, is not just permitted, but inevitable. But when government speech is fused to generative models capable of hyper-personalized persuasion at platform scale, the executive acquires the ability to saturate discourse in real time. A White House that can cheaply manufacture micro-narratives tailored to every legislative district, demographic slice, or media niche can dominate the bargaining space with Congress. It can shape the public facts to which courts later defer. This is AI-generated propaganda at scales that would have made Joseph Goebbels blush, but now constitutionally protected as the government's own voice. The technology enables not just messaging, but immersive narrative control, deep-fake presidential addresses for every audience, synthetic government news that crowds out independent reporting, personalized disinformation campaigns that are technically just government viewpoints. Again, the effect is centripetal. Policy gravity pulls toward the Oval Office. The branch with unified communications infrastructure becomes the only one that can be heard above the noise that it itself generates. The fourth issue is the issue of emergencies and emergency powers. The most consequential legal changes in AI governance will likely come via these powers. Whether Congress writes them in advance or the president asserts them in the breach, crises of malicious or misaligned AI will reward centralized authority. I think cyber shows this pattern. Legal frameworks arrive after capabilities are claimed, and exceptional authorities, once created, entrench. A future AI Defense Production Act, let's say, that lets the president commandeer private models and compute. A delegated authority to issue algorithmic shutdown orders. A statutory power to compel model or data access. All of this vested in the branch designed to act quickly and alone. Finally, and I think most profoundly, AI solves the president's oldest constraint, cognitive and managerial bandwidth. The unitary executive theory has always been truer in law than in life. No president can see, let alone direct, the millions of discretionary choices made daily across the administrative state. And I think the best example of this is Harry Truman's famous quote about Dwight Eisenhower on the eve of Eisenhower's inauguration. Poor Ike. He'll sit here behind the Resolute desk and he'll say, do this, do that, and nothing will happen. He'll be miserable. It won't be anything like the Army. I'm not sure Truman knew anything about the Army either, based on that statement. But AI can change all of this by creating a cognitive proxy for the president embedded in every level of government. This occurs in two stages. The first is internal surveillance and audit. Models digesting real-time agency emails, memos, and outputs can continually surface non-compliance with White House priorities. The periodic 5 things you did this week memo becomes an automated continuous reality check for loyalty. And the second stage of AI control is what I'd call preference injection. An executive branch AI model trained on the president's past decisions, signing statements, speeches, and memos can develop a model of the president's preferences. Then it injects those preferences into every bureaucratic decision by sitting in on meetings, reviewing documents, and proposing edits. And this AI doesn't just enforce known orders. It forms a presidential opinion on novel issues. It ensures that every discretionary choice, no matter how small or technical, reflects what the president would want if they could be there themselves. The median draft that reaches a bureau chief already sounds like the president because an AI proxy helped write it. You don't need a Saturday night massacre if you can nudge every Tuesday morning memorandum. The result is a kind of unitary artificial executive, the practical realization of a constitutional theory by statistical means. So how do we deal with this? Here, I think Ashley's prescription of plural checking remains essential. The idea is that no single institution can provide adequate oversight, so we need overlapping checks from Congress, the courts, and other actors. On Congress, Ashley proposes to adapt the logic of the Covert Actions Statute and require presidential findings and congressional notification for high-risk uses of national security AI. I would extend that logic more broadly. Congress, not the president, should decide the permissible scope of executive reliance on AI across both national security and domestic domains of enforcement. And Congress should require ongoing reporting about how and where such systems are being used. On the courts, Ashley is clear-eyed. They will rarely be the heroes, but even generalist judges can and should demand disciplined reason-giving and auditable records in all areas where government uses AI, not just in national security. Trial judges overseeing benefits determination, immigration cases, tax disputes, or criminal prosecutions can insist that when an agency or prosecutor relies on model outputs, those outputs must come with documentation and explanation. Inside the executive, the lawyers and IGs that Ashley highlights become far more important, but also need tools. If code is law, then lawyers must help set the specs. Every procurement of a model that will generate legally salient output should carry as a condition of award a governance annex. Who can change parameters? How does preference learning operate? What logging exists for later audit? And so on and so forth. And if, as Ashley notes, explainability will often trade off against capability, then the trade must be explicit and approved at an appropriate level. Non-traditional checks, another strength of Ashley's analysis, also need to be retasked for a presidentialized landscape. Companies in particular matter enormously. The government will often be buying, licensing, or fine-tuning their models. That leverage can be used to build safeguards directly into contractual terms. For instance, banning covert political loyalty scoring ensures models cannot be weaponized for partisan ends. Requiring auditable kill switches means that if a system begins to misfire, there is a clear and accountable way to shut it down. Mandating independent third-party red teaming with reporting lines outside the executive ensures that risks are surfaced to Congress, IGs, or the public, rather than buried inside the agencies using the tool. So where does all of this leave separation of powers? Well, I think with a paradox. On the one hand, AI can be a lawyer's best friend. It is in principle much more trainable than humans. It logs its steps. It can be forced to speak in reasons. Indeed, it could usher in an era of effective, lawful good governance of the sort that reformers have long dreamed about. On the other hand, the very same features, speed, scale, saturating reach, preference learning, fit the president's comparative advantages. If we do nothing, the technology will quietly make the unitary executive true not just in theory, but in practice. It will align the bureaucracy to the president's mind and accelerate everything that the other branches need time to check. The box gets darker, larger, and harder to pry open. So here is my punchline, which I hope Ashley will accept as complimentary to her own. Resist the lure of frictional unity. Some bureaucratic slack is not dysfunction, but design. If AI promises to make the executive speak with one mind, law must preserve spaces where it may not, through statutory independence, professional norms, funding autonomy for the offices that translate law into code. Ashley has written the definitive account of how AI thickens secrecy and tests democratic values. My friendly amendment is that everything she says applies with force outside the national security domain. And so if we want a constitutional order that still feels like a conversation among three branches and not a monologue optimized by a large language model, we will need the kind of institutional craft this book champions, aimed squarely at the office most likely to capture the benefits. So congratulations, Ashley, on a superb, necessary book. I hope it will be read, and I trust it will be read, not just as analysis, but as a blueprint for keeping the lights on inside the box.